It was a busy Monday morning at Atlanta International Airport. Dr. Marcus Johnson arrived at his gate with plenty of time to spare. At 45 years old, Marcus had the confident walk of someone who knew his place in the world. He wore a simple navy suit, carried a leather briefcase, and pulled a small carry-on suitcase behind him. People who didn't know Marcus would never guess that he was one of the top neurosurgeons in the country. He preferred to keep a low profile. Today, he was traveling to Chicago to perform an emergency surgery on a young patient with a rare brain condition. Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 217 to Chicago, announced the gate agent. Marcus took his place in line, boarding pass and ID ready in hand. When he reached the front, the agent smiled and scanned his ticket. "Have a nice flight, Dr. Johnson," she said warmly. Marcus nodded politely and walked down the jetway. On board, he found his window seat in the third row of first class. He stored his carry-on in the overhead bin and settled in with his briefcase under the seat in front of him. He was tired from a long week of surgeries, but felt good about heading to Chicago where he could help another patient in need. As other passengers boarded, Marcus pulled out a medical journal and began to read. He wanted to review some details about the upcoming procedure. Soon, most seats were filled, and the flight attendants began their pre-flight duties. One of the flight attendants, Karen Winters, moved through the first-class cabin greeting passengers. She was in her mid-50s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her smile seemed to brighten when she spoke to the other first-class passengers. "Good morning, sir. Can I get you anything before takeoff?" Karen asked a white businessman sitting across the aisle from Marcus. "Just water, please," the man replied. "Of course." "Right away," Karen said cheerfully. When she turned to Marcus, her smile faded. She looked at him with narrowed eyes. "Excuse me, are you sure you're in the right section?" she asked, her voice noticeably cooler. Marcus looked up from his journal. "Yes, I am. Seat 3A, Karen frowned. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Marcus took a deep breath and reached for his boarding pass in his jacket pocket. This wasn't the first time he had been questioned about sitting in first class. He handed her the boarding pass. Karen examined it closely, as if looking for a mistake. Her lips pressed into a thin line when she saw everything was in order. "Fine," she said shortly, handing it back without the courtesy she had shown to other passengers. She didn't offer him a pre-flight drink. A few minutes later, Marcus felt a chill from the air conditioning vent above. He pressed the call button to ask for a blanket. Karen returned, visibly annoyed. "Yes," she asked sharply. "Could I please have a blanket?" Marcus asked politely. "We have limited blankets," Karen said. "I'll have to check if we have any left after serving the other first-class passengers." Marcus watched as she immediately handed blankets to two white passengers who hadn't even requested them. The businessman across the aisle caught Marcus's eye and gave an uncomfortable look, clearly noticing the different treatment. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus closed his journal and looked out the window. He was used to these kinds of interactions, but that didn't make them any less hurtful. He thought about the young patient waiting for him in Chicago. That was what mattered now. He would handle this situation with the same dignity and professionalism he always maintained. Little did Karen know who she was really dealing with, and how her actions would soon come back to haunt her. The plane reached cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign turned off with a soft ding. Passengers began to move around the cabin. Some opened laptops while others reclined their seats to relax. Marcus still didn't have a blanket. He watched as Karen served drinks to the other first-class passengers with a bright smile. She took her time chatting with each one, asking about their destinations and recommending restaurants in Chicago. When she finally reached Marcus, her smile disappeared. "What would you like to drink?" she asked flatly. "Coffee, please." "Black?" Marcus replied. "And I'm still waiting for that blanket." Karen sighed loudly. "We're very busy, sir. I told you I'd check when I have time." She poured his coffee carelessly, spilling a few drops on his tray table. She didn't offer him a napkin or apologize. Then she moved on without mentioning the blanket again. The businessman across the aisle, David Miller, had been watching the situation. He leaned over and spoke quietly to Marcus. "Is everything okay? She seems to be treating you differently." Marcus gave a small smile. "It happens more often than you'd think." David frowned. "That's not right. Do you want me to say something?" "I appreciate that, but I can handle it." Marcus assured him. 20 minutes later, Marcus pressed the call button again. This time, a different flight attendant appeared. Michael Torres, a young man with a friendly face. "How can I help you, sir?" Michael asked. "I requested a blanket earlier, but I haven't received one yet," Marcus explained. "No problem at all. I'll get one for you right away," Michael said. He returned quickly with a blanket. "Here you go, sir. Can I get you anything else?" "No, thank you. That's all I needed." Michael nodded and moved on to help other passengers. Karen, who was watching from the galley, approached Michael and pulled him aside. "Why are you wasting blankets on him?" she whispered loudly. "We need to save those for our regular customers." Michael looked confused. "What do you mean? He is a customer. He's in first class." Karen rolled her eyes. "You know what I mean. People like him usually don't fly first class. He probably used points or got a free upgrade." Their conversation was just loud enough that several passengers, including Marcus, could hear. Marcus kept his eyes on his medical journal, but his grip on the pages tightened. An hour into the flight, meal service began. Karen handed out warm towels to refresh hands before the meal. She gave one to every first-class passenger except Marcus. When she placed a meal tray in front of Marcus, he noticed it wasn't the same as what other passengers received. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely. "I believe I ordered the chicken, not the pasta." Karen put her hand on her hip. "The chicken is gone. You should have boarded earlier if you wanted your first choice." "I was one of the first to board," Marcus said calmly. "And I heard you tell the gentleman behind me that both options were still available." Karen's face flushed with anger. "Are you calling me a liar? If you have a problem with the meal, you're welcome to go back to economy and try your luck there." The cabin grew quiet. Several passengers stared in shock at Karen's outburst. David, across the aisle, couldn't stay silent any longer. "That's completely unprofessional. He hasn't done anything wrong." Karen glared at David. "This doesn't concern you, sir." Michael, who overheard the commotion, quickly approached. "Is there a problem?" "No problem," Marcus said quietly, "but I would like to speak with the lead flight attendant when they have a moment." Michael nodded. "Of course, sir. I'll let her know right away." As Michael walked away, Marcus noticed a young woman a few rows back holding up her phone. She had been recording the entire interaction. Karen hadn't noticed, but soon the evidence of her behavior would be impossible to ignore. The meal service continued as an uncomfortable silence hung over the first-class cabin. Marcus ate his pasta quietly, choosing not to make a bigger scene. He had faced discrimination before and knew how to stay composed in difficult situations. His patients always came first, and he needed to remain focused on the surgery waiting for him in Chicago. 20 minutes later, the lead flight attendant, Sophia Williams, approached Marcus's seat. She was an older woman with kind eyes and gray hair neatly tucked under her cap. "Sir, I understand you wanted to speak with me," Sophia asked in a professional tone. Marcus nodded. "Yes, thank you for coming. Could we talk privately?" "Of course," Sophia replied. "Would you mind stepping into the galley area with me?" Marcus followed Sophia to the small kitchen area at the front of the plane. Karen was there, arranging coffee cups on a tray. When she saw Marcus, her face hardened. "What seems to be the problem, sir?" Sophia asked. Marcus spoke quietly but firmly. "Since boarding this flight, I've been treated differently from the other passengers in first class. I've been questioned about belonging here, denied service, given incorrect meals, and spoken to disrespectfully." Karen jumped in before Sophia could respond. "He's exaggerating. He's been demanding special treatment the entire flight." Sophia held up her hand to stop Karen. "Let me handle this, please," she turned back to Marcus. "I apologize for any poor service you've experienced. That's not what our airline stands for." "I understand that," Marcus said. "I'm a frequent flyer with your airline, and this is the first time I've had an issue like this. I'm not looking to cause trouble. I just want to be treated with the same respect as every other passenger." Sophia nodded. "That's absolutely your right, sir. May I have your name for our records?" "Dr. Marcus Johnson." At the mention of his title, Karen's eyes widened slightly. Sophia's expression changed too. "Dr. Johnson, I'll make sure the rest of your flight is comfortable. Would you like to file a formal complaint?" Marcus thought for a moment. "I prefer to handle this quietly for now. but I would like the incident noted. Understood. I'll speak with my team immediately, Sophia said. Please return to your seat, and I'll bring you a fresh meal myself. As Marcus walked back to his seat, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The aircraft shook suddenly, causing Marcus to stumble. He grabbed the back of a seat to steady himself, accidentally knocking over a glass of water on Karen's serving tray. Water splashed onto Karen's uniform. She gasped loudly. "Look what you've done," she shouted, no longer trying to hide her anger. "This is exactly what I'm talking about." The entire cabin turned to watch. Karen continued her outburst. "You people always cause problems. I've been flying first class for 15 years, and I know who belongs here and who doesn't." Marcus stood perfectly still, his face calm despite the public humiliation. Sophia rushed over. "Karen, that's enough." "No, it's not enough," Karen said, her voice getting louder. "He shouldn't be in first class. He should go back to where he belongs." The young woman who had been recording earlier raised her phone again. Several other passengers had their phones out now too. David stood up from his seat. "That's outright racism. You can't talk to him like that." Other passengers began to speak up too, defending Marcus. "Shame on you. That's disgusting behavior. He deserves an apology." Karen looked around, suddenly realizing that the other passengers were not on her side. Her face paled. Sophia took Karen by the arm and whispered something in her ear. Karen's eyes grew wide with shock. Marcus returned to his seat without saying a word. His hands were shaking slightly, but his face remained composed. He pulled out his phone and made a quick note of the time and what had happened. Michael appeared with a fresh meal and placed it carefully on Marcus's tray. "I'm so sorry about what just happened, sir," he said quietly. "Not all of us are like that." Marcus nodded. "I know." At the back of the cabin, Sophia was speaking urgently into the airplane phone, reporting the incident to the ground crew. Karen stood nearby, her face now drained of color as she began to realize the seriousness of her actions. The flight was only halfway to Chicago. The word of what happened was already spreading throughout the plane. Nobody yet knew exactly who Dr. Marcus Johnson was, but they would all find out soon enough. Sophia returned to the first-class cabin and walked directly to Karen. "You need to stay in the back galley for the rest of the flight," she whispered firmly. "I'll handle the service here." Karen's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You're taking his side? You don't even know what really happened." Sophia shook her head. "This isn't about sides. Your behavior was inappropriate and unprofessional. We'll discuss this further after landing." Karen stormed off to the back of the plane. Michael continued serving passengers while Sophia approached Marcus's seat again. "Dr. Johnson, I want to personally apologize for what happened," she said. "Would you mind if I sit here for a moment?" She gestured to the empty seat beside him. Marcus nodded, and Sophia sat down. She lowered her voice so only he could hear. "Dr. Johnson, I recognized your name immediately. My sister works at Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. She's told me about your work." Marcus looked surprised. "Oh, what's her name?" "Lisa Williams. She's a nurse in pediatric neurology." Marcus smiled for the first time since boarding. "Lisa is excellent. One of the best nurses I've worked with." Sophia shook her head sadly. "She would be horrified to know how you've been treated today. This is completely unacceptable." "Thank you," Marcus said simply. A passenger from a few rows back approached them. She was a young woman in her 20s with curly hair and glasses. "Excuse me, Dr. Johnson," she said nervously. "I'm Amber Watson. I recorded what happened earlier. I wanted to let you know I have evidence if you need it." Marcus looked thoughtful. "Thank you, Amber. I appreciate that." Sophia turned to Amber. "Would you be willing to send that recording to our customer service department?" "Absolutely," Amber replied. "What happened was wrong. Everyone should see it." As Amber returned to her seat, Michael approached with a drink cart. When he reached Marcus, he hesitated. "Dr. Johnson," he said quietly, "I feel terrible about how you've been treated. I should have done more to stop it." Marcus waved away his concern. "You've been kind. Don't worry." Michael looked relieved but still troubled. "Actually, sir, I'm a pre-med student. I work as a flight attendant to pay for school." He paused, then continued. I've read several of your research papers. Your work on pediatric brain trauma is groundbreaking. Several nearby passengers overheard this exchange. They looked at Marcus with new interest and respect. David leaned across the aisle again. Wait, are you the Dr. Marcus Johnson, the neurosurgeon? Marcus nodded modestly. Yes, I am. David's eyes widened. My God, you operated on Senator Mitchell's daughter last year. It was all over the news. Other passengers began to whisper. The news spread quickly through the cabin. Dr. Marcus Johnson was not just any passenger. He was a world-renowned neurosurgeon who had saved countless lives, including those of several famous people. An older woman from the row behind tapped Marcus on the shoulder. Dr. Johnson, you saved my grandson's life 3 years ago. He had a brain tumor that other doctors said was inoperable. You proved them wrong. Marcus turned, surprised. What's your grandson's name? Tyler Peterson. He was 8 when you operated on him. Marcus smiled warmly. I remember Tyler. He wanted to be a firefighter. How is he doing now? He's 11 and perfectly healthy. We thank God for you every day. The entire mood of the first-class cabin had changed. Passengers who had witnessed Karen's behavior now looked at Marcus with admiration and respect. Several apologized for not speaking up sooner. Meanwhile, in the back galley, Karen was checking her phone during a break. She decided to search for Dr. Marcus Johnson to see if he was really important or just someone with a fancy title. Her face went pale as search results filled her screen. News articles, medical journal features, humanitarian awards, videos of him performing impossible surgeries. And there, at the top of the results, was a photo of Dr. Marcus Johnson receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his pioneering work saving children with brain injuries. Karen slowly sat down on a jump seat, finally understanding the magnitude of her mistake. The plane began its descent into Chicago O'Hare International Airport. The pilot's voice came over the speaker system announcing they would be landing in about 20 minutes, and the local weather was sunny with a temperature of 68 degrees. Marcus had spent the remainder of the flight reviewing his notes about tomorrow's surgery. Several passengers had approached him to express their support and share stories of his medical work. He responded to each one with genuine warmth, but kept the conversations brief. His mind was already focused on the challenging procedure ahead. Sophia returned to his seat as the plane descended. Dr. Johnson, I wanted to let you know that our Chicago team has been informed of today's incident. The airline is taking this very seriously. Marcus nodded. Thank you. I appreciate your professionalism in handling this situation. There's something else, Sophia added. We received a message from Chicago Memorial Hospital. They're sending someone to meet you at the gate. Marcus looked surprised. That wasn't necessary. I was planning to take a taxi to the hospital. They were quite insistent, Sophia explained. Apparently, there's been a change in the patient's condition. Nothing dire, she quickly added, seeing his concern. But they want to brief you as soon as possible. The plane touched down smoothly on the runway. As it taxied to the gate, passengers began gathering their belongings. Several people offered encouraging words to Marcus as they prepared to deplane. Karen remained in the back of the aircraft, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Michael had told her about Dr. Johnson's accomplishments, and she had spent the last hour of the flight looking at news articles about him on her phone. The reality of what she had done was sinking in deeper with each passing minute. When the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign turned off, Sophia made an unexpected announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please remain seated for a moment to allow Dr. Marcus Johnson to deplane first. Dr. Johnson is needed urgently at Chicago Memorial Hospital for an emergency procedure. Marcus hadn't expected this special treatment, but he understood the importance of getting to the hospital quickly. He gathered his belongings and moved toward the front of the plane. Many passengers applauded as he walked down the aisle. As Marcus stepped off the aircraft and into the jetway, he was met by a group of people waiting just outside the aircraft door. There stood Dr. Sarah Chen, chief of neurosurgery at Chicago Memorial, along with 2 nurses and a hospital administrator. Marcus, thank you for coming on such short notice, Dr. Chen said, shaking his hand warmly. Emma's condition has stabilized, but we need to move the surgery up to this evening if possible. Of course, Marcus replied, I'm ready whenever you need me. Behind them, passengers began exiting the plane. Many stopped to watch the scene unfolding at the gate. Karen emerged from the aircraft and froze when she saw the medical team surrounding Marcus. She tried to slip past unnoticed, but Dr. Chen spotted her uniform. "Is this your flight crew?" Dr. Chen asked Marcus. "We should thank them for getting you here safely." Before Marcus could respond, Sophia stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, I'm the lead flight attendant. We're honored to have Dr. Johnson on our flight. He'll be in good hands with your team." Dr. Chen smiled. "He's the best in the country. We're lucky to have him." Several hospital staff members nodded in agreement. One of the nurses added, "My cousin's son would have died if not for Dr. Johnson. There's simply no one better." Karen stood rooted to the spot, her face pale with shame. The gravity of how badly she had misjudged Marcus hit her all at once. She had humiliated not just any passenger, but a man who regularly saved children's lives, a decorated surgeon respected worldwide. As Marcus walked away with the medical team, surrounded by respect and admiration, Karen realized that her career might be over. Worse, she'd have to live with the knowledge of how she had treated someone who deserved nothing but respect. David, the businessman who had defended Marcus on the plane, approached Karen as he exited. "I hope you learned something today," he said quietly. "Never judge someone by the color of their skin." Karen couldn't find any words to respond. She simply watched as Marcus disappeared into the terminal, heading off to save another life. By the next morning, the video of Karen's behavior had spread across the internet. Amber Watson had posted it on social media with the caption, "Watch how this flight attendant treated renowned neurosurgeon Dr. Marcus Johnson." The video quickly gained millions of views. People were outraged by Karen's obvious racism and impressed by Marcus's calm dignity throughout the ordeal. News channels picked up the story, showing clips of the video and discussing the larger issue of racism in everyday life. Karen Winters woke up to find herself at the center of a massive controversy. Her phone was filled with messages from coworkers and friends who had seen the video. When she turned on her television, she saw her own face on the morning news. "A disturbing incident on Flight 217 to Chicago has gone viral," said the news anchor. "A flight attendant with National Airlines has been placed on immediate administrative leave after displaying what many are calling blatant racial discrimination against Dr. Marcus Johnson, one of the nation's leading neurosurgeons." Karen sat on her couch, stunned. She had known there would be consequences, but she hadn't expected the story to become national news. Her phone rang. It was Bill Harris, the airline's director of human resources. "Karen, we need you to come to the office immediately," he said, his voice serious. "This situation has escalated beyond anything we could have anticipated." "Bill, I can explain." Karen started. "Save it for the meeting," he interrupted. "This is now a major PR crisis for the airline. The CEO will be there." 2 hours later, Karen sat in a conference room facing the airline's top executives. The atmosphere was tense. "The video has been viewed over 5 million times," explained Melissa Wong, the head of public relations. "We're receiving thousands of complaints. People are threatening to boycott the airline." The CEO, Robert Taylor, looked at Karen with disappointment. "In my 30 years with this company, I've never seen an employee damage our reputation so severely in a single day." Karen lowered her head. "I understand how bad this looks. I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake?" Robert repeated. "Karen, what you did goes against everything this company stands for. It violates our policies, our training, and basic human decency." "What makes this even worse," Melissa added, "is who Dr. Johnson is. He's not just any neurosurgeon. He's pioneered treatments that have saved hundreds of children. He volunteers in underserved communities. He's respected worldwide." Bill Harris slid a folder across the table. "We've received statements from 12 passengers on that flight. They all described the same pattern of discriminatory behavior." Karen felt tears forming in her eyes. "I don't know what to say. I've never thought of myself as racist. But watching that video, I can't defend my actions." "We have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately," Robert said firmly. "We'll also be making a public apology to Dr. Johnson and implementing new anti-bias training for all staff." Karen nodded slowly. She had expected this outcome, but hearing the words still hit hard. As she left the airline headquarters for the last time, reporters were waiting outside. Camera flashes went off as she walked to her car, her head down and tears streaming down her face. Meanwhile, at Chicago Memorial Hospital, Marcus had just completed the life-saving surgery on 8-year-old Emma Garcia. The procedure had been successful, and Emma would make a full recovery. Her parents hugged Marcus with tears of joy and gratitude. As Marcus left the operating room, Dr. Chen approached him. "Brilliant work as always, Marcus. By the way, have you seen the news? That flight attendant from yesterday has been fired, and the story is everywhere." Marcus sighed. "I never wanted that. I just wanted to be treated with respect." The airline CEO called, Dr. Chen continued. "He wants to speak with you when you have time. They're making a formal apology." Marcus nodded tiredly. "I'll call him later. Right now, I just want to rest and check on my patient." As he walked away, his phone buzzed with messages of support from colleagues, friends, and even strangers who had seen the video. What had started as an ugly incident was now sparking important conversations about racism in America. 3 days after the incident, Dr. Marcus Johnson sat in his hotel room in Chicago. Emma Garcia was recovering well from her surgery. The little girl had already started talking and moving her arms, signs that the procedure had been a complete success. Marcus had just finished his morning visit with her and finally had a moment to address the situation that had exploded across the nation. His phone had not stopped ringing with interview requests from major news networks. His email inbox was flooded with messages of support and invitations to speak about his experience. The airline had issued a public apology and announced new training programs for all employees. Marcus stared out the window at the Chicago skyline. He never wanted to be the center of this kind of attention. His work had always been about saving lives, not becoming a symbol in America's ongoing struggle with racism. His phone rang again. It was his sister, Tanya. "Marcus, have you seen the morning shows? They're all talking about what happened to you." "I'm trying not to watch," Marcus replied. "It's strange seeing myself discussed like this." "People need to hear your side of the story," Tanya insisted. "If you don't speak up, others will control the narrative." Marcus considered his sister's words. She was right. Perhaps there was a way to use this unfortunate incident to create something positive. "I'll do one interview," he decided. Just one. Later that afternoon, Marcus sat across from journalist Rebecca Martinez in a quiet corner of the hotel restaurant. Camera crews had set up their equipment, and the interview was being recorded for the evening news. "Dr. Johnson, thank you for speaking with us," Rebecca began. "The video of your experience has resonated with millions of people. How are you feeling about what happened?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm sad, to be honest. Sad that in 2025, people are still judged by the color of their skin rather than their character or contributions. What happened to me wasn't unique. It happens to Black Americans every day. The only difference is that most incidents aren't recorded on video. You remained remarkably calm throughout the ordeal. How did you manage that?" "As a surgeon, I'm trained to stay calm under pressure," Marcus explained. "But more importantly, I've developed that skill from years of experiencing similar treatment. This wasn't my first encounter with racism, and unfortunately, it probably won't be my last." Rebecca nodded. "Many people are calling for the flight attendant, Karen Winters, to be permanently banned from the industry. What do you think should happen to her?" Marcus paused thoughtfully. "I don't believe in punishing people forever for their mistakes. What Karen did was wrong, and there should be consequences. But I'm more interested in change than punishment. I'd rather see her learn and grow from this experience." "That's very generous of you," Rebecca remarked. "It's not about generosity," Marcus replied. "It's about progress. Firing one person doesn't solve the larger problem. We need education, awareness, and honest conversations about bias." Meanwhile, across town, Karen Winters watched the interview from her sister's apartment. She had been staying there since leaving her own place to avoid reporters. Tears streamed down Karen's face as she listened to Marcus speak. His compassion and wisdom made her feel even worse about how she had treated him. "He's being kinder than I deserve," Karen said quietly. Her sister placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe this is your chance to make things right." "How can I possibly fix this?" Karen asked. "Start by being honest, with yourself and everyone else," her sister suggested. "Acknowledge what you did wrong and commit to changing." As Marcus's interview concluded, Rebecca asked him one final question. "What message would you like people to take from your experience?" Marcus thought for a moment. I want people to understand that racism isn't always shouted with hateful words or violent actions. Often, it's quiet assumptions, different treatment, small rejections that build up over time. But I also want people to know that change is possible. We can all do better if we're willing to look honestly at ourselves and our biases. The interview ended, and Marcus returned to his hotel room, hoping his words might help someone see the world differently, perhaps even Karen Winters. 2 months after the incident, Marcus Johnson returned to Chicago for a medical conference. He had largely moved on from the event that had briefly made him the center of national attention. His life had returned to its normal rhythm of surgeries, research, and teaching at the hospital. The conference was being held at the Grand Hotel downtown, where medical professionals from around the country gathered to discuss the latest advances in neurosurgery. Marcus was scheduled to give the keynote speech about his groundbreaking technique for pediatric brain surgeries. As he walked through the hotel lobby toward the conference hall, a woman sitting alone in the corner caught his eye. It took him a moment to recognize her, Karen Winters, the flight attendant from that infamous day. She looked different now. Her hair wasn't pulled back in the tight bun she had worn on the plane. She appeared smaller somehow, less confident. When she saw Marcus, she froze, clearly unsure if she should approach him or leave. Marcus hesitated, then walked toward her. He had no anger left, only curiosity about why she was here. "Hello, Karen," he said simply. Karen stood up nervously. "Dr. Johnson, I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm speaking at the medical conference," Marcus explained. "What brings you to Chicago?" Karen took a deep breath. Actually, I heard you would be here. I've been trying to find the courage to contact you for weeks, but I wasn't sure if you would want to hear from me." Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from her. "May I?" Karen nodded, and they both sat down. "I've been working with a diversity educator for the past 7 weeks, Karen began. "After losing my job, I had a lot of time to think about what I did and why I did it. I've been confronting biases I didn't even know I had." Marcus listened without interrupting. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or to make myself feel better," Karen continued. "I just wanted you to know that your interview changed my life. When you said you wanted progress rather than punishment, that hit me hard. I realized I had a choice. I could be bitter about what happened, or I could learn from it." She placed a folder on the table. "I've started working with a community organization that brings people together across racial lines. We host discussions about racism and how to combat it. I tell my story as a warning about how bias can blind us." Marcus opened the folder and saw flyers for community events, along with newspaper clippings about Karen's new work. "This is meaningful," Marcus said. "It takes courage to confront your own prejudices." Karen shook her head. "What took courage was how you handled yourself that day on the plane. I've watched that video dozens of times, trying to understand how you stayed so dignified while I was so horrible to you." "Years of practice, unfortunately," Marcus replied with a sad smile. A young hotel employee approached their table. "Dr. Johnson? They're ready for you in the conference hall." Marcus nodded. "Thank you. I'll be right there." He turned back to Karen. "I need to go." "Of course," Karen said. "Thank you for taking the time to talk with me." As Marcus stood to leave, Karen asked, "Do you think people can really change, Dr. Johnson?" Marcus thought for a moment. "I have to believe they can. Otherwise, what's the point of all this?" He gestured to the folder about her community work. "Keep going, Karen. The hardest person to convince will always be yourself." As Marcus walked toward the conference hall, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The incident that had caused him pain had somehow created something positive. It hadn't just cost Karen her job, it had opened her eyes. Inside the packed conference hall, Marcus took the stage to thunderous applause. Hundreds of medical professionals had come to hear him speak about saving children's lives. This was where he belonged, being recognized for his work rather than for being a victim of discrimination. "Good morning," Marcus began. "Today, I want to talk about healing, not just surgical healing, but the deeper kind that happens when we see each other as full human beings worthy of respect and dignity." As he spoke, Marcus realized that the painful experience on that flight had become part of a larger story, one about recognition, growth, and the possibility of change. It wasn't the ending he would have chosen. Perhaps it was the one that needed to happen.